So here are the books. Here is just something about what he wrote. 400 books. Number one, the logical works, the logical books. These were books about how to reason logically, how to pursue an argument logically. And he provided terminology, he provided leadership, he explained how to do it, and those books became the tools for all of later philosophy right up to the present time. So think of that. Think of the influence that in logic or some of the other related fields, how to think logically. He taught us how to do it. He taught us how to think logically. So that's the logical works. Number two, the scientific works, meaning very detailed studies of, for instance, botany. So Aristotle gives us all the terminology we use in botany today. All the terms, all the different divisions, subdivisions of the species, that's all established by Aristotle. Or zoology, animals, and other fields, chemistry, same thing. All the terminology was set up by Aristotle in his goal to organize all of human knowledge. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to organize all of our knowledge in categories and subdivisions of the categories. And he wanted us to know exactly where everything would go. Plants go in botany, animals go in zoology. Number three, the aesthetic works. Poetics. One of the most influential books he ever wrote. Certainly the single most influential book ever written about theater, because he has brilliant insights into what great theater is based on the theater that he knew, based on the theater of Sophocles and Aeschylus. And so his poetics influenced all of the rest of poetry and theater. Every serious writer read his book on poetics before they started to write their plays. Number four, the philosophical works, meaning the metaphysics, the ethics, and the politics. So again, every single field was covered. What about the transmission? How do we get all this stuff? That's the big question. It's 2,500 years we're talking about here, all the way back to the high point in Athens. So how do books come down to us through 2,500 years? For a period of time, there's no doubt about the transmission. So from Thales down through almost to the time of Christ, there's no gaps. Everyone knows Greek. Papyrus is available everywhere. Everyone has alphabetic writing. And so therefore, the Mediterranean world is exploding with copies of these books. So they're all over. They're all over the Mediterranean. They're all over the Middle East. They're everywhere. After Aristotle died, his closest student had possession of the texts, and that student had a nephew who took possession of them after his uncle died. And so the books disappeared for a period of time, and then they were refound and edited by a book publisher editor on the island of Rhodes. And so an edition was created in Rhodes in the pre-Christian period, in the BC period. So by the time of Julius Caesar and Cicero, there was a ready, available edition of Aristotle in Greek. And since everybody in Rome of any intellectual pretension of any kind knew Greek, since the whole governing elite of Rome knew Greek, there was no need for translations. Now that's an important point in this story. So through much of the Roman Empire, there are not Latin translations because they're not necessary. And so it's the moment of Augustine, which is 400 to 500, where the first discussions of translations occur and discussions about the import of these works. Everyone knows the work of Aristotle and Plato in the Roman world. So there's no hole, there's no gap, there's no people stopped reading them, none of that. Everybody with me? So we have a continuous tradition here from Thales in the 600s down to the time of Julius Caesar and Cicero. Now, by 400 to 500, the question of their continued usefulness, if they were only in Greek, opened up. Because now less and less people knew Greek. As the Roman Empire was declining, as the wealth of the empire was declining, as the control of the East, the Greek-speaking part of the empire declined, Greek also began to decline in the West. Remember, in the East, of course, everybody knows Greek. And so, by 500, the first discussion of translating appears, and a man by the name of Boethius, 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 who is a Roman and lives both in Rome and in Ravenna, and is a very high-level official in the Roman Empire, he takes on the goal of translating all of Plato and Aristotle into Latin. Now, the mark of Boethius is important for two reasons. Number one, the idea that you need it in Latin, because you all know what that means. If you need it in Latin, it means a lot of people don't know Greek anymore, right? You need it in Latin. And number two, the idea that he could do it, that he would be capable of doing it. What happened was that he got started on Aristotle and then was executed. Breaks my heart. Every time I tell people, it breaks my heart. He was executed. It was a political thing, and he died. So, at 525, a considerable and very important and high-level work of translation had been achieved on a part of Aristotle. So that part of Aristotle survived uninterrupted to our time. So a part of Aristotle, the logical works, is available without interruption. And so in the year 1000, 1100, 1200 in Paris, a young student could go into Abelard's school on the island in Paris and study Aristotle with his logical works in Latin. Good translations in Latin. But it wasn't all of it. And it wasn't the most controversial stuff either, because it wasn't, say, his book on the soul. Obviously, in Christian times, a book by a Greek on the soul would be controversial. It wouldn't be a Christian interpretation. All those books were not translated. So what about the rest of it? What about all these other books? Well, various channels opened up for those books to be carried to our time. Some were translated in Constantinople from Greek to Latin and brought to Europe, Italy, Paris in 1200. Some were translated in Sicily, where they ended up in Greek, and with scholars who knew enough Greek to be able to translate it, and again in the 1200s. Some came through Baghdad and Damascus and Syria all the way to Spain and came to Cordoba in the Islamic Empire in Spain, in Cordoba, and Toledo, and those books had come in Arabic, so they now had to be translated out of Arabic into Latin or Spanish or Italian, which they were, and then those books could be carried to Paris or London or Rome. So for some books, that was the root. So, for example, the book on the soul by Aristotle. Very important book, very provocative book. But it was just a small part of the whole Aristotelian corpus, and it was almost no Plato. So when you read books about how the Arabs brought all the great Greek thought to Europe and nourished the Renaissance, there's a book out now, Aladdin's Lamp. And that's what the argument of that book is, that all of the knowledge of the Greeks came through Baghdad, Syria, through Spain, and then ended up nourishing the Italian Renaissance. Nonsense. Total nonsense. This is being dreamed up just because people are bending over backwards. They want more and more good things to come from the Islamic tradition, so then they come and they inflate what really happened. What really happened is a great story. In Alhambra, in Granada, and Cordoba, and Sevilla. It's a great story of cultural interchange. Toledo is the high point, and that means 1150 in Toledo. Tremendous cultural exchange going on in Toledo between Christians and Jews and Arabs working together in Toledo and translating works from one language to the other. And it's a great story. But it's not the origin of the Renaissance. It's not the rebirth of all of thought in Europe. It's a piece, very important, and filled with commentary by Arab philosophers. And that commentary was rich and fascinating and great and nourished European philosophers in Paris. So Thomas Aquinas found it fascinating to read the commentary by Averroes or Avicenna on Aristotle, because, of course, both men had thought of things he'd never thought of. So it's very productive, rich nourishment to European philosophy, and we can celebrate it and enjoy it. But let's not be ridiculous about exactly how important. It didn't just turn all of Europe around, because there were other roads from which Aristotle and Plato were coming to. So, by 1300, Europe was beginning to reconstruct the Aristotelian works by a variety of places, of origins, and finding new books in Greek and learning to speak Greek. That was the best thing. As they got better and more people knew Greek, just a few people, but as more people knew, more books could be discovered. Then, of course, comes the Renaissance. Then Renaissance Florence, 1400. That's the moment at which all of this work we've been describing, the road of Greek philosophy, coming all the way to Europe, now that road gets to be a super autostrada, huge, wide Italian road, because the Italians, the Florentines, learned Greek. That's the key step. They learned Greek. And so when they started learning Greek in 1400, they could get books all over the world that were still in Greek from anywhere. Damascus, from anywhere. Anybody who could find a book of any kind of important Greek work that was still in Greek, they could bring it to Florence and translate it into Latin, and that's what happened. And so now, between 1400 and 1500, the reconstruction, yes, the Renaissance, it's fine to use that word, of all of Greek philosophy is in the process of being completed by the year 1500. By the year 1500, all of Europe has in front of it a complete text in Greek printed in Venice of Aristotle, and a complete text of Plato printed in Venice by 1500. So that's the key moment that all of the world, every country, can now pick up their printed copy of Aristotle or Plato in Greek and have everything that has survived.